Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to our sort of live show, Themes and Things. I'm joined by my good buddy Merlin. Merlin, do you like fantasy send-offs, bro? Do you like fantasy spin-offs? That's actually the word I was
Do,
going
do
for.
I like fantasy spin-offs?
Mm.
What a loaded question. How much time do you have? I like
All of this
fantasy.
afternoon, actually.
No. Okay. Yeah, no. Yes. Do we like fantasy? Do you like fantasy spin-offs?
I do like fantasy spin-offs, but because today we'll be talking about Game of Thrones and the prequel House of the Dragon, the first episode. We haven't watched the second episode yet because at this current time it's not out, but we will get to that later this evening. But we want to talk about, or I specifically want to talk about prequels, how they fit in, what makes them good, what doesn't make them good, and when and where you can do a prequel. Because I have some mixed feelings, and I know you do as well, specifically about this House of Dragons episode, right?
Oh yes. I would like to focus on being a nitpicking little fucker. That's what I would.
Okay, but then we'll be good to go because I actually kind of like this. We'll do news and stuff afterwards. Let's just jump right into this because I think we're both
Okay.
pretty excited to talk about House of the Dragon. So here's the thing. I think we both agree that maybe this type of show didn't need to be made, but we have varying ideas about why it was made. So I am of the firm believer that this overall project is just a huge apology letter to anyone that was a fan of Game of Thrones. I honestly feel that because it's very Game of Thrones, it is very Game of Thronesy in the way it looks, in the way it plays out, the imagery we've gotten so far, and it's just the first episode, but they've crammed a lot. So they've got sex and violence and political intrigue and moral great choices, all of it just in the first episode, just quickly.
And dragons. We see dragons in the very first episode. We had to wait a season back in the day to see dragons.
That is
Um,
absolutely true, bro. And tiny ones at
okay.
that, not even like full blown
Yeah, no.
golden ones, rideable dragons.
Goodness. Okay, you keep on saying that you have a problem with prequels, and
Ooh.
this one stands as the example here. What do you what is scratching you? What is
So here's
grinding
what
your
gets
gears?
me. Prequels work if the subject matter is something that you can expand upon without necessarily um okay. So here's a Rogue One. Let's take that as an example. So if
Yeah.
you take Rogue One as Star Wars story, the reason why that works is because it's a prequel to something that doesn't necessarily affect the overall narrative. But with Game of Thrones, specifically this prequel, so here's the thing. Game of Thrones is a very like most of that story, not in the first few seasons, but eventually, like the overall arcing thing relies a lot on what the previous, like the direct previous generation did. So we have the guy who married a Stark in secret. We
Oh yeah.
have we have Baratheons that are cheating actually with their brothers and sisters to create Targaryen offsprings under the guise. We have all of that. But when you jumped at 172 years before that, does anything that you show us matter? You see what I'm
100,
saying?
172 years before Daenerys Targaryen. We
Specifically.
should we should also mention this.
And they did. And
Yes.
they highlighted. Did you like that little transition between 172 and just
Man, I cringed a little bit at that. There was a few things I cringed at, and that's why I say I'm going to be a nitpicking asshole today because the things I brought that I don't like has nothing to do with the fact that it's a prequel, as you say. Um, you were getting to a point though. I feel like you were getting to you're saying that um, prequel only works depending on the subject matter, but
Yes.
yes, but the subject matter now with Game of Thrones um, is troubling. But
It is because okay, so let me just
yeah,
clarify it. Let me just get this down, but
yes,
let me find the
yes,
words.
yes,
So here's
yes.
the thing. Game of Thrones is over. We have a lot of backstory. If you watch all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, there's a lot of backstory in it already. But none of that backstory adds or let me okay, so none of the expansion of any of the backstory given to you in Game of Thrones adds to anything that you can do before. Like all of that is contained within the singular narrative that is Game of Thrones. Everything that happens in Game of Thrones happens because of a direct result of choices made by other people, previous generations, or it was seemingly coincidental occurrences that add up to the overall narrative that is Game of Thrones. So when you have that sort of setup, when you have that narrative device, like we have a bunch of different characters, seemingly they don't know each other, but all of their actions directly affect what happens to the other characters, and that
Yeah.
concludes anything you do 172 years before doesn't fucking matter. Because it doesn't matter what these guys do. It doesn't matter what political conflict they get into. It doesn't matter what moral gray situations they get into because we know how the overall thing works out at the end.
Okay,
How
I get you. I get you. The We know where this our story is gonna start, not even where Game of Thrones ends. We know where it starts, and
exactly?
okay, and it lowers the stakes for this show because why care about any of this? We already saw the story. What is it
We
going to add?
already know anything that anyone does now doesn't matter because they're already dead by the time GLT season one rolls around.
Yes, and even the backstory for Game of Thrones of Game of Thrones entirely. Robert Baratheon's rebellion and his war, and the entire pre-drama. Uh, it will happen regardless of who is king now.
Exactly.
It's
Because what is the difference? Even if we see this whole thing concluded, so say for instance that princess stays queen and that's she defeats her uncle, whatever's gonna happen. Even if she stays queen, that's about 80 years, which leaves 100-year gap between when her life ends and Daenerys is even born.
yeah, it is, and it comes to the point eventually that um, Aegon goes mad, and it is Aegon, right?
Yeah.
The Mad King goes mad, and then sorry, yeah, the Mad King goes mad. She gets exiled. She and her brother gets exiled. Her story doesn't change, no matter who is on the throne for this story. It could be the old lady, or it could be the current king, or his brother, or his daughter. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't
Aegon's gonna
matter
go.
even a little bit. And we
Yeah,
know who has to end up because it doesn't matter which Targaryen wins this particular
yeah,
trifle. We know Robert Baratheon's going to have a rebellion and unthrone whoever Targaryen. Well, we know who Targaryen he unthrones, but that's not the point though.
yes.
Like for the particular source material, I don't think a prequel can work in the overall sense if you care about the overall arc. That being said, though, again, this show so far in the first episode feels like a huge apology letter. It goes, here's the things we know you like about Game of Thrones. We know you like dragons. We know you like a medieval setting. Maybe it's magic, maybe it's not magic. Who fucking cares? But we know you like some political squabbles, and you like some morally great choices. And we get all of that in the first episode. I mean, the king. Also, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Oh yeah, no,
This,
heavy
yeah,
spoiler
no, heavy spoilers.
alert.
We're gonna go through it all. Did you like the choice the king has to make between his daughter and his wife? Did you think that hit home? Do you think it was impactful as they like wanted to be?
So okay, so as you've just established, it's really hard to care about this story because we already have the story. Game of Thrones is the story, and the backstory for Game of Thrones is not even this prequel. The backstory of Game of Thrones remained backstory. It wasn't important. Nothing before Game of Thrones important. So already really hard to care about this. But I must say the king, his kind of story it's like the part that I connect, which is strange. I guess that's because he's gonna die real soon. That's my first death prediction. That king is
Yeah,
gonna, and
no, he kind of has to. I hear you.
yeah, because they do make him a kind of likable. They do frame his choices as really hard choices because yes, he must choose an heir, but this the first choice he gets is his son or his wife or both. So already, a complicated guy, or a guy that wants to live a simple life, because he also looks like he wants to live a simple life, but in a complicated world. How do you feel about the king? How do you feel about the choice he has to make between his brother and his daughter? Yeah.
Not entirely sure, to be honest with you, because one of the notes you sent me was all those people that his brother brutally fucking punishes in the street, are they guilty? I think that's a fair point. So I guess we'll have to see until that works out. Because I was always sure, it's like, it seems like they're just pointing out random people in the crowd and going, "Oh, you're a rapist, let's cut off your nuts. You were a murderer, let's cut off your head." So it does feel like a little bit, maybe there's a hubris there that will still get a little bit of exploitation on, or see how that unfolds. But I'm not entirely sure. I do feel that the King character is meant to strike a resemblance between Ned Stark's character, someone that is not necessarily out for himself, but of the time. Because if we're going to get into it, I don't think Ned Stark is as honorable as the story claims he is. He's very much just a man of his seemingly time, I guess, if you live in that world.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, he brings Jon Snow into his home, but doesn't once tell his wife, "Listen, this is not really my kid. This is what happened." You understand what I mean? Like, why wasn't he honest with his
Okay,
wife?
because he knew that if anyone knew who Jon Snow was, there would be no peace. It was a hard decision, and a lot of people paid for it. But
Yes, but after a few years, after seeing how
yeah,
his wife reacted to the kid, who
okay,
is innocent in this matter, going like, "Please chill off Jon Snow." This is probably going to make him suicidal later in life, which are definitely fucking dead. Yes, Jon Snow. Also, don't get me started on Jon Snow. Jon Snow is not the best Game of Thrones character, but we'll get into it. I don't know. I just feel I like the king. I'm definitely convinced that his hand, the guy who plays his hand, and
oh
his
yeah,
daughter specifically. So I feel like the daughter of the hand who he sends to his bedchambers. Like, she'll probably get pregnant with the son at some point, which will cause some intricacy. But I don't think they'll kill him off just yet.
so his name is Rhys Ifans. Oh no, that's the actor. Sir Otto Hightower. I was just like, yo, is this guy from the Dothraki Sea with this name? Hey, no, Sir Otto Hightower. He does seem a bit wishy-washy. He does seem like he's kind of out himself, but he seems like a hard person. I guess we'll have to see more of him. Um,
Mm.
just for the record, his daughter is definitely up on the chopping block. That poor sweet girl is definitely gonna die. This is
Yeah, you most definitely. Do you think she'll go before him, though? Do you think he's up for some hijinks? Because he feels like a character that might be set up to betray, but then doesn't. Like, it might feel like, "Ooh, this guy's going to betray the king at any given corner," but then stays loyal. Like, I
yeah.
get that vibe.
Okay. Well, if we start making fan theories, I'll have to watch this show to see if I'm right or not.
Place bets.
We can place bets. A little Deadpool.
Mm.
Yeah.
If you will, this is the show for it, because let's be honest, they don't give a fuck who they kill.
No, because it's Game of Thrones. Now, you said the parts that people liked, the political intrigue, the sex, the shock value. Um, but one of the things we like is the random characters dying, you know?
We do. We complain about it, but we do actually like it. Let's be
But,
honest.
okay, see, but this is also. Uh, Now I'm talking about a Game of Thrones prequel, but I'm going to bring in some Game of Thrones finale bitterness into this as well, because actually, if you look at it now, where Daenerys and Jon Snow survived, there was no, "Oh, are they going to die before this?" That was just smoke and mirrors up until the end, right?
Mm.
Um, you,
No,
you
fair.
you could have actually placed a bet on Daenerys and have been fine. And you could actually see that at the start, right? She is the lady who gives birth to dragons. Why would you not use her in your finale? So on the one hand, maybe death is all around, randomly, so we can't know who we should attach to. But for instance, the Princess Rhaenyra, you she's not gonna die though, right?
No, she probably won't. But maybe she will. Maybe this is just
Maybe
a
she
red
will.
herring.
Maybe
I
she
don't
will.
know. I
That
honestly
could.
don't know. Like again, for the first episode, I feel like it's a bit of an apology letter, and it'll all depend on the landing. It'll all depend on how they end the first season. I'm not entirely
Oh,
sure, even if there's gonna be just one season. I hope it's just one season because again, what can you do with the story apart from maybe just like reintroducing people? Because here's the thing, I know they pitched a spin-off show for Game of Thrones that will be centered around Jon Snow, which is a problem on its own because that motherfucker is not supposed to be alive anymore, let's be honest. Apart from his own suicidal tendencies, he cannot be alive anymore according to the world's own rules. The Lord of Light takes back what he's given as
yeah.
soon as the purpose for what he's given it has been fulfilled. And defeating the Winter King was, without a shadow of a doubt, the purpose for which Jon Snow was brought back to life. Nah? Can we all agree? I mean,
Yeah.
is it just me?
No, okay. If he see, now we're still talking about the finale. No,
That's the thing. That's the problem with the show. Everything that happens in this show has to add to that. It has to
yes,
add to that in the sense of, okay, this is the overall way of the world. Nothing that happens in this show can be just for this show. It has to have Game of Thrones in the back of his
yeah,
mind, if that makes sense.
it has to have that. It has to work within those confines, and I guess if if it's going to be meaningful, it has to actually add to this. You know, if we're talking about Star Wars prequel problems, you brought up Rogue One. I'm going to bring up the prequel trilogy, an entire set of movies that is a prequel to the first set, and 20 years in the making. And you can have your opinions about the prequels as much as you know want to, I guess, but it does shift what you think about Darth Vader. It does
No
change
facts. Yeah, I hear you.
who he is.
Mm.
If you're going to connect it that closely to it. On the other hand, it might be that they put it that far back so that the stakes are low, so that they can just tell any story in Westeros. I guess is the other part of it. Why?
Fair. That's very fair. Like
Yeah.
if what you say, like maybe they just we want more Game of Thrones, but we don't necessarily want to fuck with what's already been established, then we can set it 100 or whatever, 172 years before the time, so
But
it can just be whatever. That well,
yeah,
that's fair. That
but
changes it a bit.
But
Yeah.
if it can be whatever, why is it Westeros? Why is it Game of Thrones? Is it now the problem with our very franchising media industry at this point? Is why is it Game of Thrones? Why isn't it just any other place so you don't have to worry about Game of Thrones story? If you're going to put it that far back and you're going to remove it that much, why not just do your own thing? But
That's a very interesting point. Are you saying, for instance, if they did what they did here, but they did it, for instance, let's say, the reason why Dawn isn't seen as part of the Seven Kingdoms and where that break off came from, do you think that would have been more impactful doing
ooh,
something like that?
okay,
Saying,
that is actually a really good idea. But yes, if the prequel informs the work, if it changes how you can see that, if it creates a new layer to the art piece that you're making. So I would actually love to see that. I would actually like to see why Dorn is there. I would have loved to see the conquering of the Seven Kingdoms more than the fourth generation of the Seven Kingdoms.
hmm, I hear
Uh,
you. That
with
actually makes a lot of sense. So, do you think they should have gone back more and just given us a straight up story? This is how the first Targaryen
See,
tamed the first
yeah,
dragon, something like
in
that.
in my mind, that is where the story could properly begin, because the yeah, what is the conqueror's name? Anyway, the first Targaryen conquered the Seven Kingdoms. There is Seven Kingdoms to fall apart in Game of Thrones. You know, that is an important beat in the storyline. Another important beat would be the fall of Valyria, where the Targaryens come from. And that is also what I thought it could be about, is that it's the fall of Valyria, where the Targaryens started, and their ancient homeland that they lost. And then we kind of jumped in somewhere along the line, and it wasn't obvious to me before this started why they would start here. I still can't tell you why they would start here.
No, fair. Like it
Oh,
feels a little bit too disconnected. But I hear what you're saying. If we maybe got backstories to the significance or
yeah.
things that we are told significant in Game
Mm.
of Thrones, maybe something like that would have been a little bit better. But again, how many episodes do we have? Let me check actually. Do we know how long this show is going to be run for? Because I'm very scared of a second season for this. I don't think it can work, to be honest with you. I think they're hanging on by a thread as is.
Got 10, it looks like 10 episodes for the first season, so very much
Here
going
we go. They're gonna go for that 5 season arc at least.
ooh, that is rough in my soul.
Yeah, no, it can't. Let's check
It's
here.
can I tell you what's going to be rough to watch this show is
Mhm.
that there is no intro. I find it
Don't you like?
disturbing.
Yeah, there was one of your notes as well. Don't you like the little incorporation of the Game of Thrones theme song in between scenes, but just with a slight variation?
Oh,
Are you not a
oh,
fan?
oh,
You don't like the full-on intro.
the one that goes, remember Game of Thrones?
Exactly.
That one.
Yeah, that
No,
one.
but that's cute. It's the same kind of thing that they did when Anakin was turning, and they gave him a low doon 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 doon.
Yeah, almost the Imperial March,
Uh,
but not quite.
but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
not quite. So I get why they're going for that and everything. Um, do your thing. Still, you had no intro. It is rough. One of the best things on the very first episode of Game of Thrones, which is a very slow episode, okay? And it is confusing and it is talky. It is a very slow episode. The best part of that is your intro. It was that giant ass map with the little moving pieces, dramatic music pulling me into your world, setting the stage. Um, that got me into your show. You can't
No,
get away.
very fair. No,
You
very
can't
fair.
get
And
away.
also, the more you watch Game of Thrones, the more like you
Mm,
start, especially that intro, considering it's like you get to know, right? You know where Winterfell is, you know where King's Landing is. You have a bit more of a idea what's going on there. So when they show you that intro, like it grows over time because it's impressive the first time, but then after a while you
yes.
start. Yeah, I absolutely get you. Maybe no intro. So you think it was a mistake? Do you think,
Okay, so
okay, alternatively, if they went with a full-on intro, don't you think it would have been, do you think that would have been better?
I 100% thought it would be better, but I'm a intro enjoyer. I'm an average intro enthusiast. So that's but still, it's one of the parts that, as a fantasy nerd, it tickled my fantasy bones. Not a general TV watcher, a fantasy nerd, all right? A child of the Tolkienian arts, okay? A good map at the
I hear
start
you. With
pulls
some
me
triangle
in.
mountains, that's what we fucking
It
want, Chris.
pulls me in. And that's Game of Thrones had that. It pulled me in. It was half of the reason I watched that show. The other half being the hype. No, I give it a bad rap. It was a fun time. But you hear what I'm saying though is
I do.
they,
I get you,
with
yeah.
that little piece of artistry, as silly as it may seem, they pulled me into their very first painful episode. Okay,
The
and
first
then
episode is painful. No, it's absolutely true. In fact, the whole first season is it's rough. You have to,
slow,
you,
and you're not sure why,
yep.
and then
And what's going on, and who are these people, and there's just names
yeah,
being slung at you.
oh goodness. And you could also see it with the boobs per minute throughout season one. I think season two has the highest boobs per minute, but season one also has a high one, and that's because they thought they're gonna, you know, they invented sex position or at least made it famous. You hear what I'm saying? Yeah,
They
I
honestly
actually,
did. I
yeah,
actually have a problem with the sex in the Game of Thrones shows because I want to watch it with my mom and I fucking can't because it's just orgies
it is.
constantly.
It is all kind of weird sex going on. There's
Yeah, no, it's
always
the
incest.
most torturous kind they can find, right? And it's
Yeah,
just they all look so dirty. The people
yeah.
having sex aren't the lords and ladies. You understand? It's all
No,
just fucking street people.
ugh, peasants.
Peasants.
Okay, yeah. No, I hear you. Oh, there wasn't too much sex in this one. We didn't have a high boobs per minute count. They were actually tasteful and they hit a lot of people and their stuff. No, instead we had a cesarean section. Hey,
Yes, and what a scene though, no? Like
crazy.
honestly feel I didn't see it coming, so what I thought they were both gonna die in childbirth. But
Oh,
which is good on the show because again, this is what I mean though. It feels like they're going, listen, we know what you want out of Game of Thrones. Give us a chance, we'll make it right. And
oh,
most of that is hinged on that because it's like it's a good subversion of expectation. It really is. And the fact that he has to make that choice and then does and it doesn't work out either way, that's very Game of Thrones. It is very Game of Thrones. Like even the
it is.
best intentions don't work out. How did you feel about all the Khaleesi outfits walking around? Because all the Targaryens look like
Oh,
Daenerys.
all of the and even our main character I have to learn her name because in my files she's just stored as little Daenerys.
You're
Yes,
not that wrong though, mate. She is. She
yes,
does strike a similarity. It almost feels intentional.
yeah. Let's not accuse anyone of pandering. But
Not
yeah,
yet.
yeah, it does make sense. Okay, on one hand, it does make sense, especially if Daenerys was a traditional person in her dress. So she knows that these are ancient Targaryen styles. I don't know why, how. She knows, and that's why she dresses that way. That's how you would explain it, because how it actually happened is the show creators based an entire culture and court on one character and her dress. So yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
and in the real world, it happened in reverse of how it would happen in the story. But I don't mind it too much. So as I said, if it's a traditional garb for the Targaryens, it would make sense that Daenerys does wear it, and that there's like this little bit of through
Yeah,
line.
but that being said, though, she has no reference of it. Like
Yeah,
all
I don't
she
know
knows.
how she knows it,
How
but
the fuck does she know? Yeah,
that's just, it seems that's what they're going for. So
it does. Yeah, I hear you. But it
yeah,
wouldn't actually make sense. But it is fine. I can also forgive it in light
yeah.
of the fucking dragons because they still look good. Let's not lie. The
They look
dragons still look good.
good. And they bring them out early, hey? Like them and the Red Keep, they were like a
Yeah,
spectacle.
yeah,
Look,
here's what you want. I like the look of Old Valeria as well, that very first opening shot, because they spent money. They definitely spent money on this.
and they spend money on it. I'm actually you may have seen in my note that the very first thing they did was wrong.
I
Um,
actually wanted to ask you about that. What exactly did you mean, the very first
no,
thing?
because they opened up as if they're like Galadriel and the world has changed and she feels it in the air. Now, the voiceover at the start of our story, because Game of Thrones did not start with voiceover, they gave you a blank scene, then the intro, then another blank scene. You know, you got two cold
Mhm.
opens. It was so slow. And this is just how this show is handling exposition in general. It's not just the voiceover that annoys me. It is the as you knows and other writing
Remember
sins.
this thing you loved? It
Yes,
does feel a little bit like that. Yeah, yeah.
and Game of Thrones, and we like Game of Thrones for the violence and the boobs and the intrigue and or a bunch of other stuff. But one of the things we liked about it and why it was praised was the fact that the exposition was delivered masterfully. You got the information that you needed, and you either got a little treat in the shape of some sex, some softcore porn for it, or
Some of it's intense, man. Some of
yes,
it's really intense.
but there's other scenes where you get a little bit of exposition and you learn that these people know each other very long. Their friendship is lived in and worn out, stuff like that. You can go through that, especially in the first 5 seasons of it, where they were referencing the source material a lot. There is so much examples of this really good writing, of this exposition being delivered to you not through cliches and painful things and like this. And if it is painful, they spread it out, right? So you get different characters talking about different things, and you learn these little bits as you go along. Think about how long we waited to learn why the war started in the first place. How long we waited for the fact who Jon Snow's parents are, and a bunch of other stuff, including the stuff that we talked about earlier, Robert Baratheon's rebellion, and stuff like that. They don't give you the entire war and then start the story. They started the story, and the characters talk about the war like people would, and that was brilliant. And this is now, for instance, the prince going in and delivering swift justice. Now, I know King's Landing is a rotten place, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey.
But I can't assume 170 years ago it was a rotten place. You have to show that to me. And it takes a little bit. If you think about the imp and his whore coming to King's Landing, she says the city smells like piss and cum. Just that line, okay, already fills you in on how these people live and how they see their city, okay? And they're nothing like that. He delivers swift justice. I don't know if he did a good job or not. Is he actually punishing criminals, or
It's very unclear, though. I mean, it does feel like they're just picking people randomly at a crowd and accusing them of things.
And if it is that, make a point of saying that to me, because I can be on his side if they're bad people, and the justice he delivers makes biblical sense, so I can get on board of that. So show me the city is a bad place to live. It is a shit place to live, and people do not respect the laws. And then show me how he punishes them. That is the arrangement. That is how it works. That is how good exposition or world building works. And you don't just throw a guy in the street and then I must make a moral judgment, okay? Because the other characters, who are also untrustworthy, this is Game of Thrones, we should remember, the other characters say I shouldn't trust him. What are
That's
you
a clear indication. I hear you. That's very valid, bro. That is very fair. We don't know what he's doing is correct or incorrect, but they do pawn it off like, just look at this. Just look at this intrigue. Just appreciate it.
Yes, and so the some of the things that are happening in this first episode are interesting to me, and they've done a really good job getting good actors and writing good characters. I'm not contesting that. All right, they have some interesting stuff going on here, but there's also stuff they're lacking from what they had the first time around. So take to do with that with what you will. Hey, that was a rant.
No, but you're very right, bro. I mean, we need to at least, because the slow burn effect of the original Game of Thrones is what made it good. I didn't watch Game of Thrones until like season 3 came out, and then I was told like, bro, you have to watch the show. Like, please watch the show. And if you go through season 1 and 2, it is incredibly slow. Like season 1 season 1 for the overall thing handles one plot point through, and it's just Daenerys giving birth to the dragons, but it does it over 10 hours of story.
Oh, the story is so slow.
It's very slow. Yo, you're absolutely correct, right? Like, and this maybe feels like it just tries to catch you up a little bit too soon. It's like, look, but we're mid season 5 here. Let's go.
Yes, that's the thing. We're mid season 5. Let's go. I think that's why they don't have an intro as well. They want to create like this speed. They don't want
Mm.
you to. They want you to fall into this thing.
Yeah, they want you to be on a bandwagon like immediately. It
Yeah,
does feel that way. That's very accurate.
and this is also part of this thing is because of Game of Thrones, this thing doesn't need to be as good as Game of Thrones to make the money again. Okay, because it can just live on the hype of its sequel now, because we're putting the second thing first. And I guess this brings me back to your point that prequels are rough because
It's a line. It's a minefield. It really is. Prequels is a difficult thing, man. Like
yeah.
you can only really do it if it's. I feel like prequels are only genuinely justified if there's some sort of fan cry. Like if you can notice, like there's a lot of fan fiction about this one thing. Make a prequel then. But I don't think there was a lot of fan fiction about things that happened 170 years before the Game of Thrones incident.
No, man. As I said, I would have loved to see the Conqueror taking the Seven Kingdoms.
Yeah, exactly.
Bringing
Make it very
dragons.
singular. Make it
Yeah.
very, very to the point. Like it's one thing.
Or,
It's let's give you
or
10 hours of story, a la season 1 Game of Thrones, but then it's only the first Targaryen conquering the first dragon. Because like how does that work exactly? Why are Targaryens in charge? It's a blood thing, right?
okay, so
Fucking dragons up in here? Is that what's happening?
so they controlled the dragons in Old Valyria. So I'm not sure why, but they also fireproof. So I'm pretty sure it is something magical. But yeah, he came from there with his dragons. I don't think it fell back then. I'm not a Song of Ice and Fire nut. So I'm not on all the backlore, but he came from there with his dragons, and then everybody died because they're nuclears. Yeah, you know, they're nuclear warheads, just with personalities.
And sentient because they can recognize chairs.
Yeah.
Don't forget that.
Oh, they can. Oh, they can recognize chairs. They can recognize the symbolic weight of a chair.
Yes, they know what it means to sit on a chair and
Yes.
which chair grants which specific powers and the burden of it all. That's true.
Speaking of chairs, lol stabby throne.
Little stabby throne indeed. I kind of like it though. I'm not gonna lie. I like the primitive look of the throne. I like the fact that it's sharp and it cuts him.
Yeah, that's he's gonna die from it. That's the way
You think that's what he's gonna go from? That infection on his back.
That's
Prime candidates. It is.
It's hilarious. So instead of going with old Valerian king or the king that took the Seven Kingdoms, we're gonna start with the king that died of an infection from his stabby throne.
And that's the best symbolism you can buy, bro. That's MasterCard. That's priceless.
That is actually good. That is actually good. Like that is Game of Thrones summed up.
That is actually true. Maybe it'll work. Like the literal throne killed them, dude.
Well,
But I like the look of it. I'm not gonna lie. I like the look of it. What do you think happens to all those melted swords against the steps later years? Because again, this has to fit into a narrative. It has to be answered.
Yeah, I think along the line somebody thinks it's tacky and they remove it.
This is not very pretty. Can we get rid of this? Can we get rid of this?
One of my votes would be Robert Baratheon, you know, because he's not a Targaryen and he just came in and he's like, nah, none of this. This is gross.
This is ridiculous. That would work. But it's too long for that, bro. Between this and Robert Baratheon is still an entire Baratheon generation. So it's not that.
It's flipping crazy. Okay, well, hopefully they show us who takes the.
They're gonna have to. Again, that's the thing. They're gonna have to show us. Also, all of these dragons will die. You know that going in, right? Like, they'll have to die.
Oh, they'll all have to die.
Mm.
Oh wait, is this okay? But I think you might have like hit it on the money there, because this might be the reason we're telling this story. Because no, no, that's also not right. Because I know for a fact, or at least they said in Game of Thrones, that the last generations of dragons were misformed creatures. Were
Yes, because the
pygmies.
Mad King used them like in his battle arena, so they grew
Yeah,
to no larger than cats. That's literally what they say.
yeah,
So these dragons will have to die, but there will be a next generation of Targaryens, I think.
yeah, yeah,
What's
yeah.
what's the gap here? We need like 2 generations of Targaryens catch up
Okay.
to Daenerys, right?
Yo, I think a little bit more, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe 3. Yeah, yeah, maybe 3.
Okay, so I'm not versed in Targaryen bloodlines. I'm not gonna lie. Luckily, the all-knowing will help.
You're talking about Google, bro.
Yes. Oh no, this thing is too complicated. George R.R. Martin did a comprehensive job of this thing. This thing is crazy. I'm going to leave that alone. We'll talk about that next week.
Okay, fair enough.
At Targaryen bloodlines.
Okay,
Why
that's a good idea. We'll get back to Targaryen bloodlines on their
not?
own.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're still excited though. I mean, it looks good. You can't deny it looks good. It does look
If
like
if we were
money,
we were not talking about it, I definitely wouldn't have watched it through.
really.
It is.
Are you that jaded by the ending of Game of Thrones, bro? Because I know a lot. I'm hurt as well. Don't get me wrong. I think the mistake they made with Game of Thrones is they went with catching you by surprise at the bitter end was maybe not the right call. Giving proper payoffs to characters and their overall arcs would have been better. Like Jon Snow had to
Yeah.
die. Um, the hand of Bran being king is bullshit. We can all agree. It's such
Oh,
horseshit.
you're right. But if we get to the end of this prequel and it's actually a good ending, how will we ever how will we recover from that? How will we?
Very fair, because I went back and I watched like the first four seasons of Game of Thrones, and it is fantastic television, bro. It really
Fantastic
is.
television.
It's fantastic. Every single
It's so
episode
good.
is chock and block full of exposition. Because I actually want to get back to that. You said the voiceover exposition at the beginning. Does that get you? Does it make you feel like the people telling you that? Because exposition, especially voiceover, more often than not, ends up they tell you something, but then they show you that the exact same thing through the course of a season or a movie or whatever. Anyway, is that what gets you down? Does it make you feel like we're not stupid, bro? Like you don't need to tell us this shit. Like we know why we're here.
Yeah, exposition at the start of a movie is not a sin in its own. Okay, my favorite movie is Lord of the Rings, and it starts with an exposition. Right?
Does it though, or does it just start with the poet?
Uh,
Poem.
it is poetry delivered by a goddess, but yes, it is exposition nonetheless. Um,
Okay, fair.
yeah, it builds into it, but Lord of the Rings also has themes that work with that. For instance, as you mentioned, it is poetry. Poetry is an important part of the entire mythos. It gets you into the slow rhythm of the world. Things don't often change in Middle Earth. It takes forever. So when it does change, it is dramatic. It is epic. So it gets you into
Yeah,
it. It
I
brings you.
get you. It takes a
Yeah,
huge
yeah,
force. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
it takes you into it. But as I mentioned previously, the way Game of Thrones handled the exposition, the lack of starting voiceover exposition, and yet Game of Thrones is a very complex narrative. They did that without that startup. The only
Mm.
way you had to learn about the world and the history is from the characters and from their dialogue. Um, Not saying one is right and one is wrong. I'm just saying one made Game of Thrones what Game of Thrones is. And your prequel, now set in Westeros, is shying away of some of these choices. And I can't help to ask why. Why are you? Why are you dropping these things but keeping others? Is it by design, or did you not notice it? And I'm being very critical of them shame artists.
No, yeah, it does make sense. Don't you feel like a little bit of it is maybe because Game of Thrones was already established, so they were just
Yes,
trying to remind you a little
yeah.
bit?
This
Because
is
voice,
sorry. So
no, go for it.
yeah, but this is now the problem with not just Game of Thrones and its prequel. Yeah, Game of Thrones, I don't like the ending. It's not my favorite. It's rough. It was a rough time, but I can point to the parts that I did
Yep.
like. The first half of Game of Thrones is really good. Seasons 1 to 4 was so good, and even after that, there was a lot of good stuff in it. And even the finales had a lot of good stuff in it. Not, and I think my main complaint is that they didn't take more time, like they rushed it through, and everything else had been a slow burn up until that point. So that tonal shift is rough in this story. And okay, I got lost in my head there for a second. Sorry, man. No, okay, so prequels and how they leech on what this now sequel already did. How prequels, how the House of the Dragon leeches on what you already know of Game of Thrones, how the prequel trilogy of Star Wars leeches on the original trilogy of Star Wars. And you can go on and on and on. Especially where we are right now, where everything has to be an MCU like franchise.
Yeah,
Every
an
character.
interconnected universe.
Yes, and we start with that assumption. We start with we're going to create an interconnected universe, and all these characters are going to have backstories, and all these spaces in the plot is going to be filled. Never once asking ourselves, why are you telling this story? For what reason? Right? Because if you do it like this, it looks like you're telling this story for money, which makes you a whore, in my opinion.
You're not bloody wrong, mate. No,
Yeah,
it's fair. No, it is absolutely fair. Like
I,
it does matter. It does, and again, that's what brings me to this: is why exactly are we getting this House of the Dragon show? Because it feels to me like an apology. It feels like, listen, we're gonna
mm.
get this right. We're sorry about the last season of Game of Thrones. So here are the things that you like. Everyone looks like fucking Khaleesi now for some reason.
We got
But the
you.
other thing is the technology that they have seem more advanced than the
Okay.
technology they have at the start of Game of Thrones. Like it's very Dark Ages. At the beginning of Game of Thrones, it's heads on spikes. It's they've barely figured out the wheel. And House of the Dragon, they have all sorts of fucking things. I can't
Okay.
think of an example now, but you know what I mean.
I know, I hear you there, and I also noticed it, and this could also be the reason for the tonal shift. Game of Thrones is post-apocalypse.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Yes,
actually, it
okay.
is. Yeah.
Yes, because it is after the end of the Targaryen line. Now we get a king and we get Baratheon, but this realm has been stable in a single family for hundreds of years. Hundreds and 126 years, 176 years. What did you say, Nana? What was the number?
It's
But
172 years. Yeah.
172 years. Okay, that is 17 decades. That's a lot of time. So Game of Thrones is post-apocalypse. It's after this time that we are now set in. So it is kind of the difference between the prequel trilogy being shiny and clean because we're in the central worlds before the Empire, and the original trilogy being dirty because we're in a bunch of frontier settings.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, after
Okay,
the
that's
Empire.
fair. That's
Yeah,
fair.
I,
Yeah, that makes sense.
that's how my brain. That's how I'm gonna sleep tonight. That's what my brain's gonna tell me.
No, I think you got it. That does make a lot of sense because maybe at the end of the Targaryen reign, a lot of that knowledge and wisdom went through. But then, what the fuck are the maesters? What are the maesters doing if they can't preserve that? Like, isn't that the soul?
You got me there. Okay, you um because that means they figured Caesarean section out 172 years before Game of Thrones starts. Is
Is
that
that
accurate?
okay? But they do like straight up kill that woman though, so maybe they
They-
haven't got it figured out yet. But they were
okay,
definitely on the way. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay, but yeah, no, I was just looking at that. What are the maesters doing? Oh,
What
well,
are the fucking mace? Okay, but again, and this is the beauty about Game of Thrones, is you could argue that the hubris of the maesters are so up their own arseholes that they don't really think about it. Because they don't. They're like, we're the smartest guys, don't tell us shit. I mean, when Sam shows up and he's like, listen, I've seen the White Walkers, this is not a legend. They all go, you're full of cock. Let's just clean some shit pots or whatever. Or yeah, to do
I,
with that truly
I
horrifying sequence.
My favorite line from the episode, I must say, is where the king's. I think it's the king that says, "Yeah, Maester can't give you an answer without a condition." I thought that was really witty. Some of the writing is still good. I think
It
that's
is
why.
still good. That's
Yeah,
again, bring it full circle. I honestly feel like this is them going, listen, we know what you
listen.
like. We're sorry about season 8. We're gonna
Yeah,
make it good. Let's give me all your money. Just continue to cosplay
yeah.
as Targaryens or whatever. That's what we
I,
want.
I heard you guys wanted some more of that Game of Thrones. You know.
Exactly. We got you fixed, bro.
Yeah. All right.
But yeah, I guess we'll see. It'll all depend on how they stick the landing. It really, honestly, for me, it'll all depend on how this ends.
Hmm.
Because I
And
have lots of problems with the ending of Game of Thrones beyond, like, and don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily think Daenerys going mad is a bad ending. I think that is
mm,
set up quite accurately.
mm.
I mean,
It's
she
a
burns people long after people say, maybe you should stop doing that. That doesn't invoke
yes.
confidence. But she still just burns people all the time with her dragons. I don't think her. But the other thing is, if in Game of Thrones, madness is the price you pay for incest. That's why Joffrey was bad shit. That's why Daenerys is bad shit. So if the Targaryens are this old, because that's the other thing, how exactly does lineage work? Not to be that guy, but the black guy with white hair, how does he fit in? Because as far as I can, is he old Valerian? Is that the thing? Is he an old Valerian? That's why he has white hair. Because as far as I understand it, in Game of Thrones mythology, you have the hair of your parents. That's like a DNA genealogy thing. That's literally how Ned Stark figures out Joffrey is not the son of Robert and that
Yes.
there was fuckery. So,
On very strict genetic rules that this
yeah.
world has. I'm gonna answer you. Yeah, I'm gonna say yes. Yeah, go say yes. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't. Hopefully they do defend it in show. Hopefully they do give us a little bit of that. Uh, I
I
don't
guess
know.
they'll kind
Um,
of have to, though, because we do live in a world where everything gets dissected. Strangely enough, though, this show, since its release, it doesn't feel like people are dissecting it as much. Maybe it doesn't adhere to the MCU rules, because every new MCU and DCEU movie it just gets fucking dissected to the bone. But those people are. It feels like everyone's being a little bit forgiving, right? It feels like we're all just sitting here waiting, going, it's an impressive first episode, but let's see. Let's see what you got.
yeah, let's see what you got. I guess that's also part of where we are right now in media is we do we do get broken games get updated regularly, you know. So why
Mm.
not stories that update their course as they get feedback as well, you know, putting out a first episode in the first season, seeing how people are reacting and going from there. Because there's nothing that's binding them. They don't have a, you know, 10,000 page books to follow. They're living in the backstory. It's actually a lot like the Rings of Power and their situation right now as well. It is uncanny that these two came out, um, is coming out this year, you know,
About the
together.
same time. Yeah, it is actually. It's kind
That,
of like you can't
oh,
even
that,
make that up. That's
yes.
true. I haven't even thought about that. We'll
But
definitely get
yeah,
to that Rings of Power when we get to it. But I get
yeah, yeah,
what you're saying. Maybe they do have a little bit more freedom, and maybe do you think
yeah.
they take? Do you think they'll take that approach? Because also you have to. So let's say, for instance, you shoot an episode this week, you have to shoot the next episode next week. Do you think they're taking in? I guess we'll
No,
see. But it would
I,
be a good thing to
I
do,
think
like taking fan reactions and
yeah,
whatnot.
yeah. But I think season one is done. So no
Yeah,
matter how
maybe. I
we
hear
feel
you.
about season one, we're getting it. But
As is.
I
Facts.
think, yeah, I think they are like collecting the knowledge and the data and everything, because they can steer the ship in a different course because they don't have anything that is tying them down that much, in this for this story. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they have, behind the scenes, straight from the author's mouth, knowledge, which is going to make this story like, this is why we put it here. It's because it is about this incredibly cool thing that the author thought of. I haven't seen anything like that. Oh,
Mm.
before we wrap up, they said the thing. They said a
Dude,
song.
they said the thing. How do you feel about that, bro? How do you feel about a property rinsing its own thing outside of the universe? I didn't like it. I'm not gonna lie. Fuck
Is it?
off. I don't like it at all. That would
Go
be
away.
the equivalent of Darth Vader saying, "Let's go start the Star Wars." It's ridiculous. It's
Okay,
get the fuck out of here.
but
And
just
it's not just that they said it. It's that they said it in this mythological. It's like this. It's this philosophy, and it's this premonition almost. And it's the name of a dream. I mean, you don't get any more horseshit than that. It's a name of a dream that a Targaryen had, and now it's passed down as a secret. That's bullshit, bro. I won't even say it out loud on this podcast, and you can't either. It's just no. Did you
no.
like it? I know you didn't.
The Song of Ice and Fire. No, I liked it for the memes because now it says the thing.
Yes, I know what I mean.
It says
Yeah,
the
but-
thing.
No, but you can't reference your own thing like that. You
See,
just-
because
no.
the other thing is, as I said, I'm a Tolkien fan, so I like the guy that said he found an ancient book written in Elvish by a hobbit that he translated to English. So, and I know he didn't believe it, but it's still a narrative he spun. Is the idea that Frodo wrote the Lord of the Rings.
Okay, yeah, but that's
Lord of the
more.
Rings.
But that walks a maybe it's just that it walks a fine line because that is
Yeah.
fun. And although it is the same thing to say that your uncle had this dream and it's the or whoever the fuck had this dream and he called it a Song of Fire and Ice, it's not just I don't know. The Lord of the Rings thing is fun, and this isn't necessarily guilty, but it's not the same.
No. It did stand out in the writing that they called out the book's name in the story. But I'm glad they actually gave me a reason for what a Song of Ice and Fire means. So if they're going to explore the Song of Ice and Fire, they're going to explore a lot of the gaps that we got in why Jon Snow is the chosen one, or why Daenerys is the chosen one, or whatever, because it is about those people, the Song of Ice and Fire.
Oh, I hear you. That's interesting.
Yeah, so
They'll actually have to now. They're pretty binded by it. Do you think we'll get something like that? Do you think we'll get like a clear-cut definition about why Jon Snow? Do you think it's that union? Do you think
I
they'll
think-
just wrap it? Well, they'll kind of have to, though, né? They'll kind of have to go with a son born of fucking, I don't know, not being wanted or in secret or whatever, versus a daughter being born and given away immediately. It'll have to be something like that.
do we know if he was born with a cesarean section? Go with the classic Shakespearean, was born of no woman. Little
Interesting, yeah. But it doesn't
Yeah.
actually have a real mother. And, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think he was there.
No, he was definitely born of that lady and she was killed
Yeah,
afterwards.
as we've already established, I'm also not an expert on what the Maester's competency and cesarean sections are at the time of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, they didn't actually mention it. Do you think they'll have to kind of mention that as well? Now, well, like what happens to that? What happens to that? I guess we'll see. Yeah, once we watch
We'll see. We'll see what kind of show this is. It was only the first episode, and honestly, they did put a lot of interesting pieces in place, for a lot of drama to happen. So that is interesting.
That's what I feel as well. Like the writing and the intricacy of it all is not bad at all.
Yeah.
I think we're just still a little bit hurt. We're
Yeah,
just still a
maybe,
little bit. Yeah,
and-
we'll meet you for coffee, but we're not ready to get back together.
Yeah, and I'm going to judge your entire 5-season series on your first episode and the trailer. That's definitely how.
No, definitely.
The only way. The only way.
No facts.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We were going to talk about the Bioshock movie and blah blah blah, and we'll get to that next week. It's probably not good, so we'll just wrap it up there. Nolan, thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
I will see you soon, Bav.
All right.